Welcome back to So You Really Want to Learn Latin. And today, as promised, we're going to be doing a little bit more on relative clauses. Relative clauses are one of my favourite things in Latin. We can go qui, quae, quod, which is always fun. And it also allows us to read and write some slightly more interesting sentences, because relative clauses are, of course, such an important part of the language. Now, last time we learnt how qui, quae, quod goes. Qui, quae, quod, quem, quam, quod, cuius, 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 cui, 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 quo, qua, quo, qui, quae, quae, quos, quas, quae, quorum, 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 quibus or quis, 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 quibus or quis. That you have got to have absolutely firmly in your head. As my hero, Justin Guitar, always says, if you're learning something, don't leave it on the page, get it into your head. It's good advice. So, today we are going to be looking at more relative clauses, and we're going to look at some slightly more sophisticated ones. And by sophisticated, I don't really mean very sophisticated. I just mean where the relative clause is referring to a noun which isn't necessarily the easy one. It isn't necessarily referring to either the subject or the object. Okay, and we're going to learn a very, very important little rule about when you translate a relative clause. Okay, so in fact we'll start with that rule. You translate a relative clause in Latin immediately after you have translated the antecedent. Okay? Now, you will remember, the antecedent is the noun to which the relative clause refers, and the relative pronoun, the qui, quae, quod word, takes, if you remember, its gender and its number from the antecedent, but it takes its case from the grammatical position that the relative pronoun occupies in the relative clause. Okay, lots to kind of remember there. But let's just nail this new little idea, which is that when working out when to translate a relative clause, we're now going to stick to this new little idea that you translate the relative clause immediately after you have translated the antecedent. Okay, so let's just have a little look at that. So if you have a sentence like Dominum qui est in horto videmus. Okay? Now, we can see that there's a relative clause in there. We can see a qui, quae, quod word, and we're all getting very excited that yippee, it's a relative clause. But we now want to know, when do we translate that relative clause? Okay, it's nicely bracketed off with commas, so it's kind of clear that, there it is, but when do you translate it? Okay, so let's look at that one. Dominum qui est in horto videmus. Now, we go to the verb first, and by the verb we mean the main verb in the sentence, okay? Right to the end, and we see videmus. Subject of videmus must be we. Okay, so videmus, we see. Whom do we see? Back we come to the beginning, looking for an object in the accusative case, and we've got dominum. So the main sentence, the main idea is dominum videmus, we see the master. Now, after that word dominum, we've got a relative clause. Qui est in horto. Now, the qui refers back to the antecedent, the noun that has just been mentioned. So qui est in horto means who is in the garden. And all we're saying is, when do we translate that little phrase, who is in the garden? Well, we translate it immediately after we have translated the antecedent, in other words, dominum. Okay? And we didn't translate dominum until we had translated the subject of the main verb videmus. Okay, so it's not a very hard sentence, but it just proves the point. Videmus, we see. Dominum, the master. Aha! We've translated the antecedent, the master, so now we translate the relative clause, who is in the garden. Okay, let's look at another one. Mater pueri, qui est in horto, cantabat. Okay, same idea. Look at the main verb, cantabat. He, she, or it was singing. Who was singing? Let's go and see if there is a subject in the nominative case. Back to the beginning we come, and we find mater. So there's our subject, the mother. Now, the mother, over the top, okay, the mother, over the top to the verb, cantabat, was singing. The mother was singing. But we know a little bit more about this mother because she is described as being mater pueri. Okay, now pueri, genitive singular of puer, of the boy. The mother of the boy was singing. But we've just learnt a little rule. When do you translate the relative clause? You translate the relative clause immediately after you have translated the antecedent. Now the antecedent is pueri, because after that word pueri we went comma and into a relative clause, qui est in horto. So, the mother of the boy, who is in the garden, was singing. How hard can it be? And just before we move on from that one, just look at how brilliant Latin is. In English, that sentence is just a little bit ambiguous. The mother of the boy who is in the garden was singing. Well, whom did we mean when we said who is in the garden? In English, it's ambiguous. The mother of the boy who is in the garden was singing. So, the mother of the boy who is in the garden was singing. Well, who was in the garden? Was it the mother or was it the boy? In Latin, there is no ambiguity because, do you remember, the relative pronoun takes its gender and its number from the antecedent. Well, qui est in horto, that word qui was masculine. So in Latin, we absolutely know that, we don't care what the mother was up to, the person who was in the garden was a masculine singular person. So it had to be the boy. It couldn't have been the mother. Okay, pretty natty stuff. Okay, we'll do one more. Epistolam amico meo, qui est in Graecia misi. Okay, normal rules. Go to the end, find the main verb, misi, from mito, I have sent. Okay, what have I sent? Back we come to the beginning, and we have epistolam. So, I have sent a letter. Okay, I have sent a letter. Now we've got amico meo. Now those words are in the dative singular, to my friend. I have sent a letter to my friend, and then we've got our relative clause, qui est in Graecia. The word qui is referring back to the antecedent, the noun we have just mentioned. It's in the masculine singular, amico is masculine and singular and dative. So, I have sent a letter to my friend who is in Greece. Okay, and we'll do just one more from the exercise. As you know, we have exercises in the book. So I'm looking at page 59. There's a little exercise called 7.4. And in fact, in the copy of the book I'm using, I can see there's a funny little typo. One of the letters has gone wrong. Sorry about that if you've got the same edition. We'll fix it in the next print run. But the sentence reads, Pyrrhus, quem incolae Italiae vocabant, rex aperi erat. Main verb, right at the end, erat. He, she, or it was. He, she, it were a noun in the nominative singular. So back we come to the beginning and we find Pyrrhus. Okay, Pyrrhus, nominative masculine singular, so there's our subject. Pyrrhus was, now what was he? We need a complement. He was rex aperi. He was king of Epirus. Okay, so Pyrrhus was the king of Epirus. But there's a relative clause in there telling us a little bit more about the antecedent. Okay, and this reads, quem incolae Italiae vocabant. Okay, now in that relative clause, the verb is vocabant. So that's third person plural, they, or a noun in the nominative plural. Okay, in our little clause, let's see if there was a nominative plural to be the subject of vocabant, and sure enough, we've got incolae. Okay, that's masculine nominative plural, the inhabitants. So, the inhabitants, and then we've got Italiae, that's genitive singular, the inhabitants of Italy. Vocabant were calling. Okay, and whom were they calling? We're looking for an object, we need an accusative case, and sure enough, we've got the relative pronoun quem. Accusative, masculine, singular. That relative pronoun refers back to the antecedent, the noun we have just mentioned. It must be in the same gender and number, so it's got to be a masculine singular word. We don't care which case. Masculine singular noun that has just been mentioned, Pyrrhus. So that's who it's referring to. So the whole thing, Pyrrhus, okay, we have just translated the antecedent, so we now translate the relative clause. Pyrrhus, whom the inhabitants of Italy were calling, was the king of Epirus. Okay, now it does work, this little rule. You may think it's not necessary. It's going to be necessary. You will find times when you really are not altogether sure when to translate the relative clause. You can see it. You can see that it's introduced by a Quae, Quod word, and there's a verb at the end of a little clause, normally tucked away inside some commas. But when do you translate it? Well, we now know. You translate a relative clause immediately after you have translated the antecedent. Okay? It works, trust me. Okay, and just to finish off, we will do one going the other way into Latin, which is always my favourite. So if you had to have something like, we love the women who gave presents to us yesterday. Okay, right, we love the women, that's our main idea. We love, amamus, the object, the women, feminas. Okay, so feminas, amamus, we love the women. But we're going to tell ourselves a little bit more about these women, because we love the women who gave presents. Okay, now the word for who, it's a Quae, Quod word, and we know it will be feminine and plural, because it's referring to the antecedent, the women who were feminine and plural. So we're looking for a feminine plural relative pronoun, but which case? Well, who gave presents to us. So the verb in that relative clause is gave, and the subject of it is the women, or the word who. So, nominative feminine plural, quae. Gave, well, the word gave will come at the end of the relative clause. When we get there, it will be dederunt, or dabant, whichever you prefer, who gave, and then they gave presents. Latin for a present is donum, goes like bellum. We want it in the accusative plural, so we get dona. So quae, dona, verb. But before we get to the verb, we want to give the presence to us. So we want the dative plural of the personal pronoun for we and us, which is nos. So dative plural of nos is nobis. Oh, and we've also got the word yesterday. Latin for yesterday is heri. So the whole thing, feminas, comma, quae dona nobis heri dederunt, comma, amamus. Isn't that brilliant? Okay, now I have said it before, I'm going to say it again. The way to really nail this stuff is to do the exercises in the book. Do them, and with any luck you've got them right. If you're not sure if you've got them right, make sure you've got the answer book, which is like that. Put those two together and you have the recipe for success. The more practice you do, the better you get at this stuff. You're building up your vocabulary and you're practicing these little routines I'm teaching you over and over again. And remember, Latin is a cumulative thing. We started way back just learning the present tense of amo. Think how we've come on since then. Okay, so hope it's all making sense. Hope you're making massive progress with your Latin. Do subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and I will see you back here for more lessons Tuesdays and Fridays every week. Keep up the good work.